Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. This particular episode, which is going to be the second of the Bootleg Gogeta figure project, is best described as a whole lot of preparation into a lot of things. Namely, preparing first the parts to be getting them ready to paint, which involved trying to separate as many parts as I could, which, as the footage kind of shows you here, led to a few more random breakages, and namely around the knee joints on one of the Goku legs. So we had to do a little more part swapping here and there in order to get around that, namely stealing the legs off the Bootleg Gogeta, which thankfully used the exact same mold as Goku legs and thus were mostly interchangeable with a few fixes. And next in the lineup of prep, fixing some more stuff on the hair, namely trying to etch in the lines that I didn't originally do when I sculpted this thing out, which I got to some middling success, but all in all, hindsight being 2020, I should have really etched them in the first place while the epoxy sculpt was still hardening, and it would have just been so much easier for me. Last bit of part swapping, I'm actually going to take the Gogeta feet from the actual bootleg off there, rather than just trying to resculpt over the Goku feet, I should really say. And that involves a little bit of fixing in terms of the toes being loose, but it's all in all just going to be a little less work later on for me. So we're just trying to simplify the process a little bit. Now, in terms of the next bit of preparation, mostly for the upper body starting off first, or all the fur bits, I gave those a good wash in some hot soapy water, sanded the surface a little more down, gave it a little extra wash, and taped off the parts that I didn't want to paint, namely the skin colored portions. So those could be spray painted later, with the first bit of primer. Now, something else that needed a little more preparation that I hadn't originally considered on first, but thankfully had the tools for, the paint that I was going to be using, which is, just for the record, Creatix airbrush colors. They've been sitting in storage for a little while now, since I haven't really painted anything for a good stint. Probably since the second Armor X bootleg back in the day. So I needed to basically reshake the paint in order to get them to get mixed back in together. Everything had completely separated over time. So here's the footage of me using a vortex mixer, which I had picked up down the line at some point, in order to reconstitute the paint to something that would actually be usable and mixable again. Shakes the hell out of everything in sight, basically almost the floor even to a certain extent, but did the job pretty well. Also, welcome back to the airbrush booth. Haven't seen this on the channel in a while here. Honestly, it's one of those no-name brands that I got off of Amazon back in the day there. Had it originally a dinky set of lights that was just a cheapo LED strip, which I've since then replaced with these magnetized LED overall lights, one on each side there, in order to make a more bright appearance. Now, in terms of what's going on with the hair there, why is it red? Honestly, this is just mostly me an excuse of just checking to see how opaque the airbrush color I was going to use in the end was, which the answer was not at all. Mind you, that is what the primer is for. Namely, I used two different types of primers over the course of this video, but the vast majority of this stuff that you're going to see in this one is done with the Krylon Color Master brand of paint and primer that's in the spray can format, and honestly, I would consider this a mostly foolproof form of painting the stuff. Namely, once you get the stuff prepped, or at least a little cleaned up, a little soapy water, maybe a little sanding's needed, you take this outside, give it a coat, let it dry for a while, a little more than the 10 minutes I would suggest on though. Then do that, give it another paint for at least 2 to 3 different runs on there, let it dry out, and the stuff stays on your plastic without a hitch. Honestly, this is actually the same stuff I used back in the day on the second Armor X customization project, and the stuff is solid, no question asked. The only issue I would say I have with that particular brand of primer though is that it off-gases a lot. The fumes on it are quite strong, so you absolutely must be using the stuff in either a very well-ventilated area or using it outside. And even when you're letting the stuff finish to cure or air out, you need to leave it in another part of your house or wherever your workshop is, because the fumes will last for hours. I literally left it overnight in a different space before I started working on it again, which is what you see in this bit of footage when I started putting down the mixed brown paint that I wanted for the fur tones. Which, as you can also see, is a lot lighter than the very rough test brush on thing you saw earlier in the video. So yeah, I actually will need to go back later in order to probably put another coat of primer on the torso in order to lighten it up quite a bit on the parts that'll be more visible. Now, in terms of the brown paint that you see on here, it goes on the prime surfaces without a hitch. Everything is nice and smooth and clean finish on there. dried on fairly quickly, even between the layers on there, especially when the stuff was put closer to the windowsill to get some more sunlight and a little more heat, respectively. And surprisingly enough, even in the spots where I would have expected more paint rub, especially around the elbows, I'll be honest, there was a bit of paint rub that was on the more bent parts, but nothing that wasn't able to be fixed without too much issue. Now, as we reach this little bit of an end shot, you get to see some progress done with the Viejo surface primer, namely the white one on there, which, as you can kind of see, was used to paint the hands as well as the pants, belt, and other little accessories for the uniform. Incredibly clean finish on there. Does require a few layers to get the job done, but it's a very smooth finish at the end. And honestly, I love this stuff, especially going through an airbrush. As long as you make sure that you've prepped the surface for this primer properly. In case you're wondering what it looks like when you haven't prepped it properly, well, you're just going to have to wait for the third part, which is hopefully going to be the finale of this particular project. See you then.